Good afternoon, friends. Welcome to the Malcolm Renfrew Interdisciplinary Colloquium. It's Tuesday, February 9th, 2021, and a special welcome to students in INTR 450 who are getting a slice of university faculty creative activities and research over this semester. I'm Kenton Bird. I'm the co-coordinator of the series, along with my colleague Dan Buckvich from the Lionel Hampton School of Music. Our speaker today also comes from the Lionel Hampton School of Music, and I will introduce her in just a moment. But I wanted to give you a quick preview of next week. We are reaching across the border to Washington State University and are bringing via Zoom Professor Joe Campbell from the School of Politics, Philosophy, and Public Affairs at WSU. And Joe is a familiar character to many of us in Moscow and involved in a lot of research and collaboration with faculty here in philosophy at the U of I. His topic is Apology for Free Will, a defense in light of findings in neuroscience, psychology, and the social sciences. So that's a week from today on February 16th. Today's presenter is Vanessa Sielert, director and professor of the Lionel Hampton School of Music. Her teaching duties have included saxophone studio, saxophone quartets, jazz band, and jazz band rehearsal techniques. Vanessa has performed with a wide range of performing groups, including the Palouse Jazz Project, the Bob Curnow Big Band, the Tacoma Symphony Orchestra, and the Civic Orchestra of Chicago. She's an advocate of new music and has commissioned numerous compositions for saxophone, including those found on this recording project, which, as you see on your screen, is known as Duality. And her topic today is how a completed project goes from concept to product, taking us inside the performer's process. So please welcome Professor Vanessa Sielert.
Thank you, Kenton. So today I just thought I would share with you how one of these concept projects works, or at least it worked for me. I'm a saxophonist, and that is my area of research, of expertise. And as Kenton mentioned, I'm an advocate of new music. So I do like to commission composers to write me pieces and to premiere those pieces and share those with other colleagues around the country in hopes that they'll catch on and become a part of the canon of music played on the saxophone. So just a little bit about the concept of duality as a whole. The concept of duality came up with, or came from my working with a colleague, Kristen Elgersma, who was on faculty back in the late 2000s, so 2008, 2009. We decided to work together, and we wanted to establish an ensemble where both partners were equals as far as their prominence in the music, and then also had equal say as far as what type of music we would be performing. And this, for those who aren't, soloists, might not see as a profound concept, but actually when you are collaborating with someone as a soloist, as a saxophonist or as a trombone player or a trumpet player, typically you're collaborating with a pianist who accompanies you. And so we wanted to get away from this idea of it being an accompanist and a soloist, but more of a duo that both parties would see the benefits of choosing music and of being a prominent voice in the partnership. So when we commissioned works, we were looking for that primarily. The second thing that we were looking for in our commissions were pieces that really spoke to a wide audience, not just musicians who could get into intellectually what was happening in the music, but also to your average listener who might not know intellectually what was happening in the music. So it was important for us to reach that musical audience while still reaching a broader audience that could just appreciate the music for what it was on face value. Then also, it was important to me to not spend too much time on any one thing. So in all the pieces that I commissioned, I asked the composers to keep their concepts to a smaller scale piece. And that could mean that it was one movement work that was shorter in scope, or a multi-movement work that might be longer as a whole, but didn't spend too much time on one concept, so that moved through several different concepts. So what we did is we started to tour and to perform these works live and get to know the pieces. I was fortunate enough to know all of the composers fairly well on the CD. And so by knowing them well, I was able to work with them to talk through details, things that maybe didn't work particularly well for me, just personally, things that were challenging, maybe to rework some things so that it laid a little bit easier on the saxophone for my own technique, to talk through things that that I was unclear about as far as maybe dynamics or an articulation or things like that. And so with all of these pieces, to some extent, I worked through some changes with the composers. So then, once several years later, I was ready to record these pieces. Kristen Algersma had moved on into a different career, actually, and so I got to know Catherine Anderson again. I had known her from past. We had performed together, and she began to collaborate with me, and we began to tour a little bit and decided to record some of the pieces that we had commissioned. Getting into the recording studio, that was a whole nother end of things. We booked a week in the recording studio, and during that week, we performed pretty long days, focusing on one or two pieces each day. And I had a producer, my husband, Vern Sielert, came in watching the scores. He got familiar with the scores before I went in so that he could point out things that maybe we wouldn't catch because we were in the moment and performing. And then he would ask us to go back and do certain sections again if he felt like we would want to hear a second take later on down the road. It's a really important aspect to have someone listening with outside ears during the moment, just because, you know, if you go through your entire week and you have this one section of music that you don't have a particularly good take on just because you didn't notice, that can be problematic. So then we got through that week of recording, went back into the studio, and I worked with Dave Buer, who helped me edit the pieces together, taking sections that I thought were the best takes of a certain section, mixing those with others. And then after we edited that, we sent it off to Seattle to be mastered, which is a final kind of editing process where they go through and they balance all the levels so all of the pieces sound like they're at the same level, maybe put a little bit of polish or you know, reverb, those types of things on the recording. Then finally, the last step of the process for me was to decide whether or not I wanted to go with a recording label. And many times these days, people will not go with a recording label and choose to promote the CD themselves and just self-release their albums. I felt like for this project, because this was a culmination for myself of a lot of years of work, of commissioning works, of putting it together, choosing the works that I felt the strongest about, and doing recording and editing and producing of this album. I felt like I really wanted it to be put out by a label. So I looked at several labels and I decided on Albany Records, who did end up putting the disc out. I guess where I wanted to go with this, if it's okay, is I would like to share with you a little bit about the compositions that I chose in this. And first, I'd like to start with one by Dan Buckfitch. who I know that most of you know. And for those of you who, I know that all of you are probably familiar with Dan's music, but Dan's music is, I feel, very personal and personalized. This is something that I appreciated about Dan in writing this piece for me, is when I asked him to write it, he wanted to know some parameters. And then he also worked with me and worked through some things that I liked. And so, but he put his own touch on everything. So I'll just talk really briefly about each one of these movements. And Dan, if you feel like you want to jump in here at any moment, please feel free. And maybe people could ask you some questions about some things too at the end. But Dan wrote me a 3 1/2 movement piece altogether, and you probably are thinking 3 1/2, that's interesting, and it is. The first movement is called 1.0 groove song, and it's hardly a groove, not in your traditional sense. It's not just like a backbeat groove that feels really nice all the way through, but instead you'll notice that here we start at an 8/16, which is kind of an unusual meter, and we move through different meters. We go to 10/16, which is highly unusual. We have a measure of 12/16, a measure of 14/16, back to 8/16, 10/16, 12/16, back and forth with the emphasis of the measures changing so that you know, that the beat doesn't feel like standard quarter notes. And so what it is it's a groove song, but it's really just based on this idea that the 16th note stays consistent throughout the whole piece. So that's the groove, is that 16th note, but it changes pulse the entire movement. So that's 1.0 groove song. Then we move on to 2.0, which is called simple song. Very beautiful piece, very lyrical, very simplistic in a lot of ways. But I think that this piece is absolutely gorgeous. This is a piece that I really am very fond of. I know that Dan's wife also is very fond of this piece. This was one that she really liked. I think that it works well in this context, and I also have performed it with mallet percussion at the Arboretum concert in the summer, and it works well in that context too. But it's just a very lovely melody over the top of this piano. And then this is perhaps the most fun. Well, no, it's not the most funny. All of them have their unique twists. This one is called Postmodern Waltz Cubed Song. And you might be wondering what a postmodern waltz cubed is. Well, it is, if you notice, in each measure, you've got the larger beat that is in 3, okay? And it's 3 of these notes at 58 per minute, okay? So this is 1, this is 2, and this is 3. But in addition, this is broken into 3, so it's going 1, 2, 3. Those beats of 3 are broken into 3. So it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And then that's further broken into so each third part is broken 3 times. So that is where it comes up with the postmodern waltz cubed. And so I'll play a little bit of this for you in a moment. And then the final movement is the half movement. This is movement 3.5. And this one is called Metal Song. And you notice at the bottom here, it says place an 8.5 by 11 sheet of heavy duty aluminum foil on the lowest strings. That ended up being changed. This is, it ended up being a piece of sheet metal. And then also, you're supposed to cover the bell of the saxophone with aluminum foil and play over that. So I'm going to play a little bit of this for you so that you can hear. But I also like to do that while looking at, let's see if I can share this. The original manuscript, which I actually still play off of. That part that you looked at was written out, copied out by a copyist, this is the actual part that I look at when I play. And I believe that you'll be able to hear. So Kenton, if you can give me a thumbs up, if you can actually hear this when I play it, that would be great. Okay?
Will do.
I'm not sure whether the sound is coming across on that, Ken, or is it a little bit soft?
A little bit soft, but audible. So that was great.
All right, great. So that was the postmodern waltz cubed, and I don't know whether you could all feel that pulse in 3, but it is there. And then this last one, Metal Song, is the one is the half movement. And you'll notice in this movement that there's sections that are marked ad lib. Those were just open to be played using this scale up here. So those were improvised. So this is the Metal Song. So as you could probably tell, even within that one piece, within 1.5 movements, there's a pretty stark difference in the styles. And I think that Dan did a great job of capturing what the essence of the whole album was to not, it was like, if you didn't like what you were listening to, just wait a couple of seconds and you'll get onto something that you do. And Dan captured that element of what I was looking for with that entire piece. Dan, did you want to add anything? Are you still around?
Yes, I'm still around.
Huh.
No, I mean, it's great playing, but it's, there are a lot of people who would go, what is that music? I might be one of them.
That's not the greatest endorsement in the world, Dan, but yeah.
Well, no, it's super fun to compose for players who are, at your level and putting all that time into it. And it's interesting research. And a lot of that stuff comes from questions I get from undergraduates. Is there such a thing as this time signature? Or what do 3 dots before a note mean? Whatever.
So Dan, I've got a question. You are not a saxophonist. How do you write music for an instrument that you don't play, or really for 2 instruments? I mean, you do play the piano, but I'm curious about how you hear that melody in your head when it's not an instrument that is part of your own repertoire.
Well, in my world, hearing the melody in your head is, it's what you do. That's easy. But I have access to a saxophonist who asked me to write the piece and said, these are some of my favorite scales. And so what I do is, and it doesn't matter if I'm writing for Vanessa or if I'm writing Hanukkah pieces for the holiday concert, I'll bring the final solo part to the soloist with a red pencil and say, let's fix this.
Guys, Vanessa, a question. Why
Sure.
are those your favorite scales?
I don't know that they're my favorite scales, but and the one Dan kind of created, that was a new one for me to practice. But I don't know that they are my favorite, but they were interesting sounding.
Yeah.
Where did the titles come from? Did you suggest those, Vanessa, or Dan, did you come up with the title for the metal piece when you decided to put the aluminum foil onto the bell of the horn?
Yeah, sure. After that, once I heard aluminum foil on a saxophone, I was entranced. I knew that movement had to be in there.
Kenton, I have a question.
Hi, Nancy. Go ahead and jump in. You've got a little bit of an echo.
You want to turn that down for me? Sorry, Kenton, we have 2 computers going on here. Gary? Turn that down, please. My question is how you made the decision to switch from the aluminum foil to the sheet metal on the piano. I wonder if you have examples of the sounds from each of those treatments.
Well, actually, we don't have an example of the aluminum foil because we found that it really didn't produce the same kind of sound on the piano strings. It didn't produce enough of a sound to be able to tell what was going on. So Dan tried several things, right? You ended up bringing in a sheet metal.
Yeah, what I never tried on the saxophone, and Kenton would know about this. What are those aluminum sheets that you print newspapers on? Do they still do that? Probably not.
Yes, they're just aluminum printing plates that are used for offset printing, and the Lewiston Tribune goes through a couple hundred of them every week.
Yeah, so Vanessa, that might have worked better on saxophone, but I don't know that it would be very good for the finish, right? Mm-hmm. Because any of the aluminum foil we tried on the piano, basically you couldn't, tell it was there.
So when I think of saxophone and a piano, I think immediately of Paul Desmond and Dave Brubeck. And I've been reading a lot about Paul Desmond's song for Audrey Hepburn recently, and his longtime crush on her. But I wondered, Dan, when you write something for saxophone and piano, are you influenced by other duos, in Brubeck's case, a quartet that included a saxophone? And Vanessa, the same for you. Are you influenced by players that have come before and have developed particular licks or flourishes or styles?
Do you want to go first, Dan, or? I would say that I am definitely influenced by players who have come before, but I can't say what any one is the most important in my development. And I think that, like you, Kenton, one of my favorites is Paul Desmond, but I also like Cannonball Adderley, who's very different. I like Kenny Garrett, who is very different and more contemporary than that. But then I also listen to a lot of classical saxophonists, Claude DeLong, the teacher at the Paris Conservatory, some older players, Eugene Rousseau. So there are lots of people and lots of ideas that have infiltrated me, I'm sure, but I can't point out anyone in particular.
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly all those names. But, I spend a lot of my time listening to my faculty colleagues and students play recitals, and I hear interesting music that I wouldn't normally hear. And there's a lot of great French literature for saxophone and piano that I find, interestingly attractive. And so I, trying to kind of imitate that is fun. But in the world of composition, we're spending a lot of time exploring, not by ear, but by eye, strangely enough. That's how you come up with some of those scales and some of those effects. So it's not necessarily music I would listen to. I would listen to the players that you both mentioned more often than I would listen to way out there 21st century music. Although it's fun to hear occasionally, but I'm not going to put it on over dinner.
I have another question for Vanessa, if I could. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
When a section says ad lib, do you really just make it up on the spot, or is this like collaborative composition? You've worked out some licks beforehand, or what do you do when you see ad lib on a script?
That's a great question. I do spend time working it out, and in a live situation, I would likely do more on the spot than I do in a recorded situation. So when I was recording this, I pretty much knew exactly what I wanted it to sound like, and I played pretty much the same thing on every take. But if I was doing it live, I would have still worked out some ideas and some concepts, and I would have just kind of seen how it developed. So that's me. And there are some people who would do the latter in both situations. They would just see how it worked out. But definitely, I think most people would spend some significant time figuring out what sounded good, what lined up with the groove, and what lined up harmonically with what was happening.
Yeah, so in your case, I think it sounds like a collaborative composition effort to me, and it must really help to know Dan so well. I mean, to be around him so much and to hear so much of his music. Is that right? Is it easier to ad lib with someone that you know so well?
I don't think it's ever easy, actually, but yeah, I mean, I think. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it was a challenging thing. I think even given the parameters, and Dan was really good about giving me some parameters. He gave me parameters in note choice, and he also gave me parameters by what he wrote before and after. It's still challenging to develop something on your own, but Well, speaking of this idea of contemporary music that you might not put on over dinner, I thought that maybe I would share another work or a piece of a work on this disc. And this is by Dylan Champagne, who was a student, and he's since gone on, but he was a student at the university. He was a punk rock guitarist, and he came to the U of I without a whole lot of knowledge of how to write music in the traditional sense. He had written music a lot, but hadn't written it down. And so his style developed out of more of what was going on in his head and learning how to write it down. And so it's very raw sounding. I just want to show you this as the score. And you notice that, you know, I have these long sustained notes over a kind of a complex pattern in the piano. And as you go on, it just kind of remains kind of complex, shifting between meters, you know, standard 4/4 into 7/8, with the pulse being different in those measures, and lots of sustained notes over some pretty intense patterns in the piano. So I show you that in contrast with what I read, and that looks more like this. And you'll notice over the top of my score, I have little cues written in. So this is what I would have to do on a piece like this to make it make sense to me in learning it. Otherwise, I'm just hearing all of these random attacks and I'm not particularly keeping track of the meter. So you notice I have the hits over the top of there. And then over these parts, I have, so this is in 7/8, but the 7/8 is broken up into 2, 2, and then 3. So I have a slash, slash, triangle. So I have these little symbols above my music to tell me where we are in time, which made it much easier to listen or to figure out what was going on as I'm learning the piece. So I'll play a little bit of this first movement of Bridges, Breaks, and Bells. And it's funny, he titled it Bridges, Breaks, and Bells. It's 3 movements, but they aren't individually titled Bridges, Breaks, and Bells. It's just the whole piece is called Bridges, Breaks, and Bells, and this is movement 1. So that was a very different kind of piece, but again, short enough that if it wasn't exactly what you were hoping for, you could have something immediately following. But I hope that you could see that learning something like that, it really takes a lot of mathematic figuring out before you can even really approach it.
So I'm curious, at the end of that, why would you do triplets in a 4/4 measure rather than just a 6/8?
I suppose you could do either. It just depends on the tempo, right? The tempo that you wanted to take. So I think that that was how he conceptualized the tempo.
Cool, because he changed the tempo too there. For
Yeah,
that
right.
measure. Yeah.
Right.
Cool.
Right.
I love your annotations. When I play the piano, I get lost when the time signatures keep changing like that. So having those annotations, that's a great guide. I'm
Right.
going to remember that.
Yeah, I find that that's a really important part of the process of learning a piece. And if you're going to ever find the groove, you need to figure out what the meter changes are and where the emphasis changes. Well, lastly, I didn't want to leave you all on a note of maybe imbalance on a day like today. I wanted to leave you with something that perhaps you could relate to a little bit more. And this piece was written, and this again was partially the concept of the album, that I wanted it to be all things that were approachable by your average listener. And so in talking to Vern Sielert, who is my husband, who is actually he is more of a jazz writer, about writing a piece for saxophone and piano, something that he hadn't done a lot of. He decided to go with some familiar language and write based upon a tune that he knew of. And so let me pull this up. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this tune, but if you've seen The Breakfast Club, you might remember Don't You Forget About Me by Simple Minds. And so he took this familiar language and he rearranged it for the ensemble. And not only did he rearrange it, and you'll hear some of the melody throughout, but you'll hear it in different meters and such. But he also did something that Dan did in his piece, but maybe went a little bit further. He wrote in an improvisation section. This improvisation section, though, is in 7/8, which is not a typical meter to improvise in. He wrote this improvisation section with chord changes very similar to what you would see in a jazz piece. So I have two tunes on this disc that are this way, that have a familiar melody, and then a section that's opened up for improvisation more in a classic jazz sense. And so this is what this is. It doesn't sound like jazz improvisation, but the chord changes and the cymbals that are used are the same as what you would see in a jazz piece. Just to give you an idea of this piece, I'll play this and then I'll take any questions that you have. So there's that. Again, very different. I hope that you're detecting a difference in style and
Vanessa, you started on this project, you said, in roughly 2008 with Kristen, and now it's 2021. Has it been something you've worked on a little bit at a time over the years, but then decided you finally wanted to bring it from concept to final project? And maybe just talk a little bit about the sustaining the creative energy to make this long-term project succeed.
Sure. So when the group started out, it wasn't the concept wasn't to record an album necessarily. It was to have an ensemble that was more equal in nature, that played this eclectic mix of music. Although this may all sound like it's all in the same vein to many of you, I feel like it's a kind of a broader stroke at what classical traditional saxophone music might look like. And Kristen and I just started out really enjoying playing with one another. So we would play twice a week and bring different things in for rehearsal. She'd bring things, I would bring things, and some of the things worked, some of them didn't. Some of them worked moderately well, and we did perform some of those pieces, but you know, some of them didn't end up on, well, a lot of them didn't end up on this disc, obviously. We toured the region and played some at some national conferences, bringing some of this music to those national conferences with other saxophonists. And it wasn't until, I guess, gosh, probably 3 years ago that I finally felt like, well, maybe I should start looking at recording some of this music, because I really felt like I had an album's worth of stuff that I felt really good about, that I really wanted to push forward. And at that time I was playing with Catherine, who's been a wonderful collaborator as well. So yeah, it wasn't initially a project that I was planning to record, but as time goes on, you start to get into your bag of tricks, into things that you are performing repeatedly, some things that you really feel are worthy of putting out there.
Congratulations on getting it to this point. And will there be a CD release party or some sort of virtual event when you?
I certainly hope that there will be a live release party once we're all able to gather and do this together. That's my goal.
Well, great. Other questions from the audience? Students, anyone who is curious about the composition process or the performing process, or even the mechanics of going from recorded music to a, do they still press CDs? Is that the term used?
That was another question that came up when it was time to go, because I could have chosen to just release it on digital for digital download, but I chose to go ahead and have a few copies pressed, and so it's available by either way that you'd like. You can get it on digital download or on a physical disc, and you can do that at Amazon or at albanyrecords.com.
Hearing no other questions, I think we could knock off a little early today, but I'd like to invite the audience to turn on your camera and offer a virtual round of applause, or within Zoom to put up your hands of applause. And thank you, Dan, for your insights and for your participation in the project as well. Next week, Tuesday the 16th, we'll be hearing from Joseph Campbell, faculty member in philosophy at WSU, an argument against free will. So he'll be presenting that next week. So hope you can join us then. Thanks, everybody. It looks like the sun is breaking through as we head into our cold snap towards the end of the week. So stay warm, stay well. See you in a week.